One thing I'll add before we sign off is Thomas noticed a little while ago, after we were getting out of our suits, he looked out the window when he saw our second stage pretty much flying in formation with us just underneath us, and that was very special. So we all rushed to the windows to look at that for a little while. So that was pretty cool. So we're enjoying our first day on orbit. So we got a lot more to go, and we're looking forward to it. Hope you guys enjoyed the little tour of our capsule, and we'll be in a much bigger environment tomorrow once we dock with the International Space Station. Have a great day. Take care. So long from Endeavour.
Man, I really hope we get to see that more during our coverage. I just loved watching the inside there, and that was our first peek inside the cabin. The crew themselves getting situated. You saw their suits that they donned that we saw for most of the pre-launch coverage that cover their entire body look to be in just a small black bag. That's that's pretty incredible that they can sort of condense it like that.
Right. Yeah, and very cool tour that they gave us. Again, this was a live broadcast earlier that we just replayed in case you missed it. But very cool. They gave us a little tour, showed us the display panels, introduced us to Gwen, their zero-G indicator, and also showed us around the capsule and some views from outside the window.
Yeah, which Thomas said was, oh, I don't know if this is going to be good, and it was incredible.
It was beautiful.
It was a beautiful shot of Madagascar. Yeah, just a very special moment. Hopefully we'll get some more views from inside the cabin. We will, of course, only get them when the crew is awake and when the crew gives us permission to come on board. That sleep period coming up in a couple of hours. We have a couple of other milestones. Of course, they'll get a chance to have a meal before they go to bed. And then they'll, of course, enter into a sleep period, which is allotted for 8 hours before they wake up with a wake-up song of their choosing. I'm very curious to hear what that's going to be. But in the meantime, we're going to provide continuous coverage from here in Hawthorne of the entire journey on the way to the International Space Station, through hatch opening and a welcome ceremony once they're on board. And we'll be answering questions using the hashtag #LaunchAmerica. So please continue to send those in. We have one from Cody who's asking, how big is the Crew Dragon?
Well, the Crew Dragon, the inside where the crew is approximately 328 cubic feet, which is almost equivalent to a small room. And you can kind of see from that replay of that broadcast how big it really is with the 4 of them in there. There's 4 seats with 4 astronauts on board right now, but it's actually large enough to have 7 people on board. And they did show us the cargo below the seats, the stowage area. If we do not put cargo on the vehicle, we could fit 3 more seats in there, so you can kind of get an idea of how big it is. And even with 7 people, they will have a little bit of space to still move around, which is pretty cool for especially flights like this where they are, you know, approximately 23 hours long.
That's right. That's right. And having that space on board is absolutely critical. Yeah, these questions are amazing. Keep sending them in using the hashtag #LaunchAmerica. This one comes from Erica, who's asking on behalf of her middle school class, what kinds of food do astronauts get to eat in space? Jesse, we've been getting the food question quite a bit.
Man, it's making me hungry. Yeah, they have MREs, which are meals ready to eat, which I'm totally on board with becoming an astronaut for this reason. They don't have to cook it. They don't need to microwave it. They can warm up their foods, but they're basically ready to eat without needing to add any ingredients. They could just warm it up. Some of them are just ready to eat, open up and ready to eat, or they can be rehydrated with water.
That's right, and there's a large variety of meals that the astronauts have in orbit. There's a standard menu that they can choose from before their flight, well before their flight. They can have meals that they select as ones that are their preference, and they can be flown off on different cargo missions to the International Space Station ahead of their launch. I can't get enough of Gwen floating around in the cabin there. We're still lucky enough to be getting some of these views from the inside of the Dragon cabin. We can see some of the display panels that show their position around the Earth, and they're able to monitor some of the different systems that they have on board Dragon. But of course, much of that work being done from here in Mission Control Hawthorne.
And we've got a really cool view of Aki right there on your screen. Not sure exactly what he's doing, but he is right above the seats there in Crew Dragon. It's pretty cool views. I love that we get to see them live. So as they're coasting towards the International Space Station, we get some internal views of that Crew Dragon with them moving around.
Absolutely incredible. All right, this next one, using the hashtag LaunchAmerica, we're continuing to ask questions, talks about how much does the International Space Station weigh?
Oh, wow.
You know,
space.
I'm full of fun facts, but I'm not super sure about this one. I want to say 1 million pounds, but don't quote me on that. I think it's very... I think, okay, yeah, I am getting confirmation. It is right around 1 million pounds. All right, not bad for a guess there. But yes, yes, that's what it is. It's about the size of a football field. The internal volume is about the size of a 747 plane, approximate to the size of a 5-bedroom house, although it doesn't really feel like it because it is longer than it is wide, like your typical 5-bedroom house. Very, very spacious. Much of the total area, though, of the International Space Station that makes up its 1 million pounds is this truss structure that has all of the communications equipment, battery, and of course those large basketball court-sized solar arrays that are constantly drawing in power to provide power to all of the payloads and of course to the systems that help the astronauts live and work aboard the International Space Station.
I think that's pretty incredible that it weighs around 1 million pounds, but it's flying at 17,500 miles per second, right? That is incredibly fast for how heavy that weighs.
Right.
But I'm sure being out in space probably helps that.
That's right. And it's all due to the rendezvous, right? This is what we're seeing now with the Crew 2, is in the rendezvous and approach phase. It is a smaller capsule, but it will add to the total mass of the 1 million pounds that is the International Space Station. And that's how the International Space Station itself was constructed. You don't take 1 million pounds and lift it off of the ground. You do it piece by piece. So that's how the space station was constructed over the course of more than a decade. And even after a decade, we've been adding more and more components onto it, including just recently we installed a new commercial airlock on the Node 3, which is on the port side of the International Space Station, and that's an airlock that's going to be able to house different experiments, and it's basically its own whole module. Then of course you have visiting vehicles like Crew Dragon. There's going to be 2 of them flying simultaneously in space, all adding to the mass that is the International Space Station.
Very cool. We have another question here. What propellant does Super Draco use? And the name of this propellant is amazing. It is monomethylhydrazine with an oxidizer, nitrogen tetroxide. It's very difficult to say. One day I will be able to say it. For now, I'm just going to call it NTO and MMH. And MMH is actually hypergolic, which means that it can spontaneously combust when combined with an oxidizer. So we don't need an ignition source. Basically, you just mix the 2 together, and it will ignite and fire those Super Dracos.
Now, there is a difference between the Super Dracos and the Dracos. They both use that fuel, the monomethylhydrazine, and I'm going to try it, nitrogen tetroxide.
There you go.
But the service section Dracos, the Dracos that are used for a lot of the burns that are going to help Dragon make its way to the International Space Station, each of those thrusters provides about 90 pounds of thrust, approximately. The Super Dracos are used for an abort scenario for the purpose of escaping from a speeding rocket. So those engines provide somewhere between 3 and 17,000 pounds of thrust.
Got another question here. Why do they wear their spacesuits during docking?
An excellent question. It has to do with the phase of flight. So you notice some of the views we're getting from inside Dragon now. The crew are not in their suits, and that's because in terms of space flight, this is not one of the more dynamic periods. Dynamic meaning there's a lot of stress on the vehicle, or potential for stress. So we saw them for launch because there is a lot of stress for launch. And the crew during that dynamic period, while the Dragon, or the Falcon rather, is rocketing the Dragon into orbit, there's a lot of stress on that vehicle. And if there were any breach into the cabin pressure, they do have that safeguard that is the suits themselves to help maintain pressure and help the astronauts survive. Now, in a docking scenario, you do have two spacecraft coming together, and then after that, they'll start depressurizing, or repressurizing rather, the vestibule to get them in there. Another dynamic period where a lot can happen, so you want to put on the suits as an extra safety precaution.
Now, if you're just now joining us, you are watching a live broadcast of the Crew 2 mission as the Crew 2 astronauts are coasting on their way as we speak to the International Space Station. And we have been with you since this morning watching the crew suit up in the ONC building. We watched them as they hopped into their Teslas and rode down the NASA Causeway to the pad, ingressed on Dragon. We had an on-time liftoff this morning at 5:49 a.m. 5:49 a.m. Eastern Time, with first stage coming back to land on our drone ship, Of Course I Still Love You. We had Dragon separate from the second stage, and as we mentioned earlier, the crew was actually able to see the second stage from the Crew Dragon looking out their window, which was pretty cool. And then we also had a successful nose cone deploy.
Now, after that, immediately after the Dragon spacecraft separated from the Falcon 9, it began what we call the activation and rendezvous phase of the mission. Now, during this phase, Dragon is configured for on-orbit operations. The phase begins after separation of Dragon from the Falcon 9 and ends with the completion of the final co-elliptic burn. Our initial orbit today is 210 kilometers by 190 kilometers, with those values representing the apogee and the perigee of the orbit, or the highest and lowest points over the Earth. That means the orbit isn't a perfect circle, but more like a very slight ellipse.
Dragon has already executed one of the 5 burns, which will gradually raise its orbit to align more closely with the station. That first major burn was the phase burn and was performed at the first apogee of the initial orbit and raised Dragon's perigee to a higher altitude.
The next burn, which based on our orbital data, is the boost burn. We'll raise Dragon's orbit until its orbit reaches an altitude just 10 kilometers lower than the space station. There may be some phase burns that happen before that boost burn. But after the boost burn, that'll be followed soon after by the closed co-elliptic burn, and that'll place Dragon on an orbit roughly co-elliptic with the space station. This means the crew will be about 10 kilometers lower than the station during their entire orbit around the Earth. The fourth maneuver is the transfer burn, where we're raising Dragon's apogee, or the highest point of its orbit, to just 2.5 kilometers below the station. Then we round everything out with a final co-elliptic burn to once again maintain a constant orbit beneath the station, this time just 2.5 kilometers below.
Then we'll get into the approach, initiation, and final stages of Dragon's rendezvous with the space station. This is also when we start integrated operations between the Dragon control team here in Hawthorne and the space station flight controllers in Mission Control Houston. The teams will transition to integrated operations roughly 45 minutes prior to the approach initiation. During the approach, SpaceX flight controllers will work in tandem with the NASA team in Houston to activate and test out a number of systems on Dragon, including bidirectional communications with the station using the C2V2 system, and that stands for Common Communications for Visiting Vehicles, and sets up a data stream from Dragon to the station, giving another path for Dragon telemetry to come to the ground and giving an additional command capability to astronauts aboard the station. They'll also maneuver Dragon to proper attitude and initialize the navigation sensors used for the methodical approach to station.
Tomorrow at approximately 12:40 a.m. Pacific or 7:40 a.m. GMT, Draco thrusters on Dragon will fire for the approach initiation burn when Dragon is about 2.5 kilometers below the station and just about 7 kilometers behind it. This will swing Dragon up until it's about 400 meters directly below the station. This maneuver will also move Dragon inside one of 2 safety zones around the station that requires a set of go, no-go poles with the different control teams. The first zone is called the approach ellipsoid, which is an imaginary shape measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, essentially a large 3-dimensional oval. Before Dragon is given permission to move inside the ellipsoid, referred to by teams here as the AE, it is configured to be on what is known as a 24-hour safe trajectory. This means that if Dragon lost all control to its thrusters, it would be at least 24 hours before its trajectory would move inside that approach ellipsoid.
Once Dragon arrives at 400 meters below station, it will be at what is known as waypoint 0 and will be the first checkpoint during our approach. The vehicle can hold at 400 meters or continue on if all systems check out to approach to waypoint 1. By this point, the teams will do a go-no-go poll for Dragon to move inside the keep-out sphere, another zone that consists of an imaginary sphere around station with a radius of 200 meters. It's another chance to confirm all of the guidance, navigation, and control systems are working correctly on Dragon before moving closer to the station, and carries a requirement similar to the AE that Dragon's orbital trajectory would not bring it inside of that sphere if control was lost, but this time only 4 orbits or about 6 hours instead of 24 hours.
Dragon's move from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1 will swing it up and out in front of the station, pausing at a distance of approximately 220 meters. At this point, it will be on what we call the docking axis, which essentially means it's directly in front of the docking port. The crew is headed to the forwardmost port on the International Space Station, the Node 2 forward port. That's where Dragon docked for both of our demonstration missions as well as Crew 1, and is where one of 2 international docking adapters is located. These were installed for new commercial spacecraft flights and for any other future spacecraft that also will use the International Docking Standard.
Once Dragon is only 20 meters away at waypoint 2, the spacecraft focuses on aligning its docking system with the docking adapter. Dragon will then fly in and make contact with the IDA, giving us what we call soft capture. The soft capture ring then retracts until sensors indicate it's time for the hooks to drive in place to give us a hard capture and firmly secure Dragon to station. Then it's time for leak checks and hatch opening, which is currently timelined to come about 2 hours following docking.
So we have a lot of action still to come. Stay with us as we follow Dragon, carrying NASA's Crew 2 astronauts to the International Space Station. We're working in tandem with the International Space Station flight control teams over in Houston, Texas. Let's check in with the latest over there. Courtney?
Thanks, Gary. The crew is awake aboard the station, getting ready to welcome the Crew 2 astronauts tomorrow. On docking day, NASA's Victor Glover will be prime for monitoring Dragon for its final approach and will take the lead on hatch operations. Once the hatches are opened after Crew 2's arrival, we'll have 11 people living aboard the station for the next few days. Station Commander Shannon Walker will give the new arrivals a safety briefing. They'll have a light day before heading to sleep early while the rest of the Expedition 65 crew conducts some additional science and continues preparations for Crew 1 to return home. Meanwhile, here in Mission Control Houston, the Orbit 2 team is now on console after a shift handover. The team of flight controllers here in Mission Control Houston is now being led by Flight Director Adi Boulos. Several hours before the crew boarded Dragon, the space station did their own go-no-go poll. There are several key systems we had to ensure were functioning properly before NASA can give their final go for launch. Again, everything is still looking good on the station side for Dragon's arrival, and that'll do it for us here in Mission Control Houston. Now back over to Hawthorne.
All right, so over the last 20 years, crews aboard the space station have completed over 3,000 scientific and educational experiments. The Crew 2 is prepared to add to that growing number. Once Crew 2 arrives at the space station, they'll spend the next 6 months working on our orbital laboratory, having 7 crew members on board, with 5 of those on the U.S. side compared to the 3 we've had for years, significantly expands the amount of research that can be conducted.
Not only will the crew be contributing to hundreds of experiments, they'll also be bringing some with them on Crew Dragon. Resupply hardware for the vascular aging study is one of those experiments. This investigation is a part of a series of studies from the Canadian Space Agency looking at the effects of weightlessness on astronauts' blood vessels and hearts. Vascular aging hones in on issues known to pose risks to astronauts' health, like radiation and insulin resistance, a precursor of type 2 diabetes. Studying the responses of the cardiovascular system in space better equips us to understand how our arteries age here on Earth.
Also launching aboard Crew Dragon is hardware for an experiment called Celestial Immunity. It builds on earlier studies to evaluate how gravity affects our immune response. It uses cells from both elderly and younger adult donors to study possible age-associated effects. The investigation could uncover novel immune pathways useful for the development of new vaccines and drugs to prevent and treat existing and emerging human diseases.
Including hardware to support new science on board station, Crew Dragon is carrying more than 500 pounds of cargo today. This also includes crew supplies like clothing and shoes, cameras, lights and spare parts, and tools for spacewalking, the station's exercise devices, and life support hardware on station.
And once Dragon is ready to come home, the teams will pack several hundred pounds of cargo inside the capsule to return to teams on Earth. When Crew 1 returns as early as next week, they'll be carrying more than 260 pounds of science samples for researchers back on Earth to analyze from more than a dozen research projects. They'll also bring any old or failed parts from station systems, giving technicians on the ground a chance to analyze hardware up close and potentially refurbish and refly parts to the International Space Station. Now, we're following along again on Crew Dragon's journey to the International Space Station and answering questions from you, the viewers, as we make that journey. We're using the hashtag #LaunchAmerica, so please continue to send those in, and we'll continue to answer them as much as we can. We got a lot of time, so we'll answer as many as we can on the way uphill.
So we got a question here. Why do they wear their spacesuits during docking?
That's a great question. They wear the suits during the dynamic phases of flight. So we saw them wear the suits for the dynamic phase that is launch. A lot of stress on the vehicle, and there's, that suit provides an extra protection in case there were a breach to the cabin air pressure. That they have the suits themselves still maintaining that pressure that will help to save them in the event of a breach to the Dragon's cabin. Now, another dynamic phase is the docking phase. You have two spacecraft coming together, and again, it just provides that extra protection, maintaining pressure and making sure the astronauts themselves are safe and protected during that, again, dynamic phase of flight.
Got another question here from Mr. Strollberg's 5th grade class. Does the astronaut food taste good? So we've been talking about the astronauts' food. There are MREs, which are meals ready to eat. I personally have not been able to try them yet, but have you, Gary?
I actually have, yes, and it is very tasty. It is. They have a lot of variety. Variety is one of those things that is seemingly unimportant, but then when you're on a trip to space for 6 months, if you start eating the same meals over and over again, that sort of repetition is not necessarily good for the well-being of the astronauts, right? So having that variety, having something that you're looking forward to, definitely provides a lot. Now, being able to taste them, the taste buds of astronauts on orbit are slightly muted when they go into orbit. So we find that they like hot sauce. So we have a variety of hot sauces on board. It gives it that extra zing, that extra zip, that adds a little bit of flavor to really any meal that they have on board, and really helps to intensify the flavor just a bit, so it can get past some of the muted taste buds that occur when astronauts are in orbit.
It's a pretty interesting fun fact.
I'm chock full of them.
We've got another question here. How long is the duration of the mission of Crew 2? Well, we have been here since a few hours before liftoff, and the from liftoff all the way to station is about 23 hours. We will be here live covering the entire mission. And again, that 23 hours is due to some orbital mechanics so that the Dragon vehicle can chase down the International Space Station, as well as, Gary, you mentioned factoring in a sleep period to make sure that they do get rest for all the operations that they have to do on board Crew Dragon when docking to the space station.
That's right, and it's a big journey ahead of them that they have to actually dock to the station, but the Crew 2 mission really is to transport them to their home where they're going to stay for 6 months. And that's the real trick here, is this is just the beginning of their flight and their journey. That is their mission. The Crew 2 mission really does encompass the full expedition that is on board the International Space space station, their mission when they're on board is science and technology development, really. There's a lot of payload developers on the ground that find that microgravity is a fantastic place for a number of experiments. You can find out a lot about different, whatever sort of scientific field you're in, you can find out a lot about it as you're understanding more. There's computers on board, high-end computing using commercial off-the-shelf computers on station, making sure that that can work in microgravity. Protein crystals grow more perfect. Turns out that you can make fiber optic cables more perfect by growing it in microgravity. All of this just by doing science in a laboratory that you would have on the ground, but just putting it in the environment of microgravity, really one of a kind. You can't really mimic that on any ground-based facility.
Yeah, that is really cool, Gary. We've got another question here. Who are the amazing astronauts of Crew 2 mission?
Amazing being the operative word, right? They are absolutely incredible people. We have an international crew from 3 different countries. First is NASA astronaut Shane Kimbrough. He's flown to the International Space Station once before, actually before that as well, on a shuttle mission to outfit the International Space Station with some of the new, they called their mission the Extreme Home Makeover mission when he did that on shuttle, but he also did a long duration flight. He's got a lot of experience. He's got experience in the Army as well. Then we also have Megan MacArthur, who's got a degree in oceanography. So she's been an explorer in underseas before she was an explorer in space. She took a shuttle flight up to the Hubble Space Telescope and had a mission to help to repair that. Her job was the robotic arm operator. Hopefully she'll get to use the robotic arm on the station side for the very first time, something I think she'll be very familiar and used to, using the shuttle's robotic arm. Then you have Aki Hoshide, who, like Shane Kimbrough, flew on both the shuttle and a long-duration expedition on board the International Space Station. He's got a number of spacewalks and even did a Nemo mission underwater. Nemo was it's in an Aquarius habitat, extreme environment living. Just instead of in space, it's under the water. So he's an official aquanaut as well as an astronaut. And then you have Thomas Pesquet, the first European to fly on a Crew 2 Dragon. He has flown to the International Space Station once before on a Soyuz for a long-duration mission. He actually flew with Shane Kimbrough, so he's very used to having him for a long-duration mission. Talking to them before, I know they get along very well. They're both very neat, very tidy people, so you know they're going to operate very well in space. And he's definitely looking forward to his journey and sharing his experiences now for his second long-duration flight. Very, very amazing people, really.
Yeah, incredible. And they talked about it earlier on the broadcast about almost how difficult it is to become an astronaut because you have to be super duper awesome, pretty much, right?
Super duper awesome and very lucky. Especially, I remember talking to Thomas. It just so happened that he was just at the right place at the right time, right? There's definitely a lot of qualified people all across Europe, all applying for these opportunities. I know the European Space Agency is about to send out a call for more astronaut applications to bring in a new class of European Space Agency astronauts. And Thomas Pesquet, very, very qualified person, commercial airline pilot by training, and just really all around very, very smart person, but just happened to be right place, right time. The most recent class of NASA astronauts in 2017, I believe there was somewhere around 18,000 applications.
Wow.
And they selected 12. So,
oh, man. The chances.
Competition is stiff. Competition's stiff.
Well, thank you for tuning in. You are watching the live broadcast for the Crew 2 mission. Please stick with us. We are sticking all the way through this coast phase as the crew makes their way to the International Space Station. Please keep sending in your questions. Use the hashtag #LaunchAmerica and stick with us because there's more to come.
Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
SpaceX Endeavor, I hear you loud and clear. How are you doing, Sarah?
Copy that, and doing well. Looking forward to supporting you guys today.
Great hearing your voice, not in the sim. And one quick question. We're looking for sweaters. If you have a location for us, we did look at the map and all that. We tried to search it, but couldn't find it. If you can let us know, that'll be great.
Absolutely. Let me figure out where those are for you. Stand by.
Thank you.
Aki, SpaceX for sweater location.
Good.
You should be able to find them in location 2 in the sleepwear bags.
Location 2, sleepwear bag, and we did look at that. Let us take a look again, but we thought we did not find it. Okay, stand by. SpaceX Endeavor for inventory.
Go ahead, Aki.
Yeah, so we looked at
Dragon SpaceX, we cut out in the middle. Could you please repeat your last?
Yes, sir. We took a look at both bags in location 2, and we only found sleepwears. No sweaters are found.
And copy that. I have one other suggestion from our cargo packers, and that is location on the cargo pallet, C5-2.
Okay, copy. We'll take a look at the C5-2. Thank you. SpaceX Endeavor for inventory. No joy on that C25. We took a look at that bag. It looks like everything is crew personal for station.
And copy that, Aki. These are NASA packed bags, so we're trying to sort through that and get you a better answer. Stand by.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Welcome back to the live broadcast of the Crew 2 mission. We are live as the Crew 2 is on board Crew Dragon, making their way to the International Space Station. And currently, there are some comms with the Corps here in Hawthorne. It is Sarah Gillis communicating with the crew on board Dragon. They're currently looking for some sweaters.
That's right. There are a number of stowage locations for items that have been packed inside of Dragon. So you saw some of those storage containers during the onboard tour, which hopefully we'll get to see another glimpse inside Dragon as Dragon makes its way around the Earth and passes over ground stations that provide the live feeds coming from Dragon that we're able to see. If you recall from that initial broadcast, Thomas Pesquet pointed out a number of different stowage items that were underneath, positioned underneath the seats, where all 4 Crew 2 astronauts were seated for the launch phase and into orbit. Some of those stowage items include lockers, polar lockers, that provide cold stowage for scientific experiments that can be used on the way uphill or on the way back for return to Earth. In fact, some scientific samples may make their way inside Dragon 2, this Crew 2 Dragon, for when it returns in the fall, later in the fall of this year.
And if you're just now joining us, what you're seeing on your screen is on the right-hand side a view of Mission Control Hawthorne with the Corps on the left-hand side. That stands for Crew Operations and Resources Engineer. And it is Sarah Gillis this morning. And again, they're currently looking for some sweaters for the crew. They checked a couple stowage compartments and did not find the sweaters, so that is what the Corps is working on at the moment.
The astronauts still have a number of hours until their designated pre-sleep period, sleep period, scheduled to come up in just about 4 hours from now. They'll have 8 hours throughout the 23 hours that is part of the trajectory for the Crew Dragon to rendezvous with the International Space Station. So they'll have a number of hours from now until they get to that designated sleep spot.
Yeah, and during that sleep phase, we did have 1 burn already complete on Dragon, but we do have 4 more coming up, and during that sleep phase there will be a couple burns. It'll be the boost burn as well as the close burn, and then the crew will wake up prior to the last 2 burns, which will be the transfer burn and the co-elliptic burn.
Now, shortly before we get into approach initiation and enter into the approach ellipsoid, teams here that you're seeing in Mission Control Hawthorne will undergo joint operations with the teams over in Mission Control Houston, the flight controllers overseeing the operations of the International Space Station. Both teams will be operating under joint flight rules, monitoring the same procedures, and carefully coordinating the steps for the approach phase that'll get Dragon closer to the International Space Station, eventually getting directly 400 meters below the station, then swinging out in front and pausing for incremental steps until it makes its way to the very forward port of the International Space Station. Some of the items that are in stowage now includes the spacesuits that they wore for their journey uphill and into orbit. Those spacesuits being worn for some of the dynamic phases of flight. Prior to approach initiation, the astronauts will put on their suits once again, or don their suits. Some of the views you're seeing from inside the cabin as of late include the astronauts without their suits. This is not a dynamic phase of flight. Dynamic meaning there's a lot of stress on the vehicle or potential for stress, and which includes the docking period. So as they enter into joint operations, having the suits on will be critical. They likely won't need to perform a leak check until after the approach initiation burn, but they'll at least have the suits on and ready for those joint operations.
Dragon SpaceX for comfort.
Go ahead.
For awareness, we are actively working to resolve a discrepancy on our information on the ground to try and locate your sweaters. I did want to offer, if you guys are feeling cold, feel free to adjust cabin temperature through 4.080 increment warmer.
Okay, copy 4.080. We have the procedure up, so we'll talk about it and let you know when we're gonna execute it.
And we copy all.
All right, the interaction you just heard from the core, you see on the left of your screen, that's Sarah Gillis, providing sort of the same roles and functions that the Capcom has in Mission Control Houston, the voice from here in Mission Control Hawthorne up to the crew 2 astronauts. Still working to resolve finding some sweaters for the crew in terms of comfort. But again, The flight controllers here in Mission Control Hawthorne have the ability to control the temperature, sort of the thermostat. That is the cabin air temperature inside of Crew Dragon Endeavour. The crew just confirmed that they are looking at the procedures right now, looking at some of the options, and will report back down to Mission Control Hawthorne with some of their next steps. Again, they have approximately 4 more hours until they have to enter into a sleep period. And they do have a couple of options to maintain their comfort throughout the flight of Crew Dragon Endeavour to the International Space Station. And as Crew Dragon makes its way around the Earth, it is passing over some ground stations and providing live views. What you're seeing on the right is a live view from inside Endeavour. The crew and Gwyn Gwyn in positions to look at some of the data. You can see Megan MacArthur in her seat, the pilot seat, that seat specially form-fitted to her, as well as the other seats to the other astronauts of Crew 2. Absolutely incredible, Jesse, to see some of these views. Feel like we're lucky to be seeing them as often as we are.
Right, it looks amazing to get some live views inside of Crew Dragon. And love Gwyn Gwyn, that Penguin 0G indicator that they have named Gwyn Gwyn. See him flying throughout Crew Dragon.
All right, in the center of the displays, you can see from this particular camera view, center screen, you can see a map that is the trajectory of the Crew Dragon on its flight to the International Space Station. You saw it in the form of a sine wave as it makes its way around the orbit, an orbit around the Earth. A Earth in the shape of a globe, when turned into a flat map, turns into what looks like sort of a sine wave, even though the orbit really is almost elliptical in shape. On a map, it does look like a sine wave, so they are able to track their position over the Earth as they're flying behind the International Space Station and below it. Right now, several kilometers below it. Now, we'll continue to provide coverage of the Crew Dragon's flight to the International Space Station. Continuous coverage on both NASA TV and SpaceX's YouTube channels. Stay with us as we continue our coverage and provide periodic updates here from Mission Control in Hawthorne.
SpaceX Endeavour for inventory.
Go ahead, Aki.
Hey, so finally, you know, Toma found the sweaters. It was in a 1.0 CTB labeled Shoes LV Clothing, and it was on pallet C Charlie 5-2, like you said, and it was in that bag.
Copy that. Great news. I'm glad you guys were able to find them. Sorry for the confusion.
No worries. Thanks for the help.
Welcome back to our broadcast for the Crew 2 mission with the Crew 2 astronauts on their way to the International Space Station as we speak. And we did hear some words from the Corps to the crew. They were looking for some sweaters for some time, but they were able to resolve the location of those sweaters, so successfully found the sweaters. That is really great news. Help keep the crew comfortable on board Dragon as they're cruising to the International Space Station.
That's right, and we were able to get some views from the inside of the cabin recently as Dragon makes its way around the Earth and passes over some ground stations. We can get some of those live views from some of the camera feeds inside the Dragon cabin. Now, earlier today, during the flight of Crew Dragon from orbit now to the International Space Station, or to where we are now, the crew aboard Dragon actually did a broadcast for us. They took the camera from the inside and showed us around some of the items that they have aboard Crew Dragon Endeavour. We're going to bring that video that was recorded earlier during today's broadcast live back to you so you can watch it again. I know it's something that I enjoy watching again over and over. So here's that video from earlier today of Crew 2 inside Dragon Endeavour.
Hello, everyone. Welcome on board Endeavour. We're a couple hours into the flight, making our second lap around the Earth. Right now, we're over kind of eastern South Africa, so it's really great looking out our windows, and we get to see some pretty cool stuff up here. But we had an incredible launch. Hopefully, you guys got to watch it this morning. Right as the sun was rising, we took off. We chased the sun pretty quickly and caught it up just a few minutes after we took off. That was pretty special to see the sunlight coming in shortly after liftoff. We're going to show you around the vehicle real quick, and hope you guys really enjoy it, and I'll pass it over to our pilot, Megan MacArthur.
Hello, Earth. It's great to be back in space again after a few years for me. The ascent was incredible. The ride was really smooth. We couldn't have asked for anything better. There may have been some hooting and giggling up here while all that was going on. We hope you enjoyed the show as well. I'm kind of relearning. I'm like a baby bird here, relearning how to move around in microgravity. It feels really good, but it feels a little bit weird too. Fortunately, it's a nice small space that I can relearn to move around together. I'm going to hand it over to Thomas, who's going to